I've worked in the ICU long enough to know that death has its own rhythm here. Machines beep, pumps hum, ventilators wheeze, but underneath it all, there's a silence that tells you when someone's slipping away. You learn to feel it before the alarms go off. But what I'm about to tell you goes beyond instincts. It's about something the staff whisper about when families aren't around. Something we've all seen, but none of us want to admit out loud. We call it the silent visitor. It was past midnight on a Tuesday. The kind of night where the halls stretch out forever, dimmed lights casting long shadows across polished floors. I was charting at the desk when a flicker caught my eye. At first, I thought it was just a reflection, maybe one of the transport staff moving in the hallway. But then I noticed it wasn't moving like a person. It was lingering. A tall, black shadow stretched across the doorway of room 12, perfectly still. Almost too still. I froze. My instinct was to get up, to check if someone needed help, but something held me in my seat. My heart thudded in my chest as I stared. The figure wasn't solid, more like smoke shaped into the outline of a man 7 feet tall. No features, no face, just standing there. Seconds later, the monitor from room 12 erupted in shrill alarms. The patient inside, a man in his 70s recovering from sepsis, had coded. By the time we rushed in, he was gone. When I looked back at the doorway, the shadow was gone too. For weeks, I didn't say a word. I told myself I'd imagined it, that exhaustion had played tricks on me. But one night in the break room, a fellow nurse leaned in close and whispered, "Have you seen him yet?" The room went silent. Every nurse looked up. She didn't have to explain who him was. They all knew. Turns out, I wasn't the only one. Several nurses confessed to seeing the same tall, black figure, always at the door, always moments before a code. Some said they'd caught glimpses in their peripheral vision. Others said it stood long enough for them to count the seconds. And every time, the patient in that room didn't make it. The most terrifying encounter I had was during a double shift. I was running on caffeine and adrenaline when I felt the temperature drop in the hallway. The air seemed heavy, almost pressing against my skin. That's when I saw it right outside room 18. The shadow stretched across the doorway, darker than the dim light around it. I could swear it turned toward me, even though it had no face. My stomach dropped. Inside room 18, a young woman was recovering from a complicated surgery. She was stable, or so we thought. I rushed in, half out of instinct, half out of fear. And there it was, her blood pressure tanking, heart rhythm faltering. We called a code, the team flooding in, hands moving fast with compressions, meds, shocks. For a moment, we thought we had her back, but within minutes, she slipped away. When the room finally fell silent, I stepped out into the hall. The shadow was gone. After that, we started keeping track. We didn't write it in charts, of course, how could we? But among ourselves, we whispered, "Did anyone see him last night? Which room?" The pattern was always the same. The tall shadow would pause at a door. Hours or sometimes minutes later, that patient would crash. Not all deaths. No, sometimes the patient survived after resuscitation. But if the shadow appeared more than once for the same room, the ending was always the same. We joked about it sometimes, trying to lighten the weight, calling it our ICU Grim Reaper. But deep down, none of us were laughing. I'll never forget the night we lost 3 patients in a row. I was assigned to rooms 9 through 12. At around 2 a.m., I stepped out of room 9 and froze. The shadow was there again, but this time, not at one door. It seemed to glide down the hall, pausing at multiple rooms. 9, 10, 11, 12. My knees went weak. I wanted to shout, to do something, anything, but what could I do? By morning, 3 of those patients were gone. And I'll never forget the eerie calm of that shadow drifting ahead of us, as if it already knew. I don't know what it is. Some nurses say it's just coincidence, our minds connecting dots we're desperate to explain. Others believe it's death itself, walking the halls, choosing who to take. What unsettles me most is this. We never see it when the families are around. Only in the quiet hours. Only when the halls are dim. When the ICU feels like it belongs to the dead as much as the living. Now, every time I start a night shift, I feel the hairs on my arms rise as I walk past each doorway. I catch myself glancing too long at the shadows, waiting to see if one of them will move. And when a monitor alarm goes off, I don't just brace for the code, I brace for the possibility that somewhere, the silent visitor is standing in the hall, watching us fail to stop what's already been decided. Because in this ICU, sometimes death doesn't knock. Sometimes it waits at the door. I remember the night of the rosary beads like it was yesterday. I've worked in the ICU long enough to see death in every form, quiet, violent, expected, sudden. But every so often, there's something that lingers after the monitors have gone silent. Something no chart or medical record could ever explain. The patient was an older man, maybe late 70s. He'd been in and out of the hospital for months with heart failure, and by the time he landed in our unit, we all knew he was near the end. What stood out about him wasn't just the weakness in his voice or the gray tint to his skin, it was the way he held on to his rosary. His hands shook from age and illness, but those beads never left his grip. Even during blood draws or line changes, he'd keep them looped around his fingers, murmuring prayers under his breath. Some of the younger staff found it unsettling, hearing whispered Hail Marys echoing in the middle of the night. But I thought it gave him strength. On his final night, I was his nurse. The monitors showed what I'd already seen 100 times before, the slow decline, each number sliding lower. His breaths came shallow, uneven, his chest rattling like an old engine. I adjusted his oxygen, checked his lines, offered what comfort I could. And still, even when his grip was weak and his eyes were glassy, he clutched that rosary tight. The beads dug into the paper-thin skin of his hand, leaving little red marks. I remember standing at his bedside when it happened. The moment of passing is something you don't forget. His breathing slowed, the alarms threatened to sound, and then, silence. Not just from the machines, but in the room itself. A stillness you can feel in your chest, as if the whole world pauses for a second to mark the loss. His hand went limp, the beads sliding slightly but still resting against him. I pressed the code button, though it was more for procedure than necessity. When the doctor called it, I gently folded his hands across his chest with the rosary still there. It felt like the right place for it to stay. Hours later, long after the family had gone, long after the body had been moved to the morgue, the unit had quieted down. It was around 3 a.m, that dead stretch of night when exhaustion sets in and the halls feel endless. I was catching up on charting at the desk when I heard it, a faint sound. Sharp, distinct, clatter, like something small and hard hitting the floor. I stopped typing, ears straining. Another sound followed, softer but clear, the rolling of beads scattering just a little before coming to rest. It was coming from down the hall, from his room. At first, I thought maybe housekeeping had dropped something, or maybe another nurse had gone in there for supplies. But when I got up and walked toward the sound, the hall was empty. The lights above flickered faintly, casting everything in that eerie ICU half-glow. His door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open, heart pounding. The bed was stripped bare, sheets folded tight, ready for the next patient. The monitors were silent. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant. And on the floor, near the side of the bed where he had died just hours before, I thought I saw a flash of movement, as if something had just rolled out of sight. But when I knelt down to look, the floor was empty. I stood there longer than I should have, waiting, listening. The silence was so thick it pressed against my ears. Finally, I forced myself to turn and leave. But before I pulled the door closed, I swear I heard it again, the faintest tick-tick-tick of beads brushing together, like fingers moving along them in prayer. Back at the desk, I didn't say anything at first. But then one of the aides walked over, pale-faced. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. I didn't even have to ask what she meant. She had heard it too. Over the weeks that followed, the story spread among the night staff. Some claimed they heard the clatter again, especially in the quiet hours. Others said they felt a brush against their scrubs when they passed that room, like something grazing them at the hip. One nurse swore she saw the faint outline of beads lying on the floor, only for them to vanish when she blinked. We all knew the rosary had gone with him, tucked in his hands when the body was taken away. There was no reason, no way for beads to still be there. And yet, the sound carried on, as if he was still clutching them, still praying in that dark, empty room. I try to explain it away sometimes. Maybe it was a dropped pen, maybe a loose piece of equipment rolling across the tile. But the truth is, deep down, I know what I heard. It wasn't just a sound, it was a presence. The same way the silence feels heavy when someone takes their last breath, those beads carried a weight that didn't end with death. Now, whenever I walk past that room on the night shift, I can't help but listen closely. And sometimes, if the hall is quiet enough, I swear I hear it again, the faint clatter of prayer beads slipping from unseen hands. And in those moments, I wonder if he's still there, clutching them the way he always did, whispering prayers into the dark for all of us who are still waiting for our time to come. I remember the night he told me about the cold hand, and to this day it makes me question everything I thought I knew about this place. The patient wasn't even one of our sickest cases. Middle-aged man, recovering after surgery. Stable vitals, slow but steady progress. Compared to the codes and traumas we deal with every night in the ICU, he was supposed to be one of the easy ones. The kind you check on, chart your notes, and move on from without a knot in your stomach. It was just past 3 a.m, that dead hour of the night shift when the hallways stretch too long and every machine hum feels louder than it should. I was doing my rounds when I saw him awake, eyes wide open in the dim light. His monitor was steady, oxygen level fine, but he looked shaken. His skin was clammy, his lips pale. "Are you all right?" I asked, adjusting his IV. He hesitated before whispering, "Which one of you sat with me last night?" I frowned. "What do you mean?" He swallowed, his throat dry. "The nurse who held my hand. She didn't say anything. She just sat there with me, all night. Her hand was so cold I thought she was wearing gloves, but I was glad she stayed. I didn't want to be alone." I froze where I stood. We were understaffed that night, like always. None of us had time to sit with him for hours, let alone hold his hand. I told him gently, "No one sat with you, sir. We checked on you, but no one stayed." His face drained of what little color he had left. "No," he insisted. "She was here." She squeezed my hand. I felt her. The way he said it, it wasn't confusion. It wasn't delirium. It was certainty. When I stepped back out into the hallway, my coworker was at the desk. I asked if she'd been in his room. She shook her head, eyes tired but firm. "No one's been in there except for the hourly checks." "Why?" I didn't tell her. Not right away. But that moment stayed with me. The next night he brought it up again. "She was here. Same hand. Freezing cold. I don't think she left." His voice trembled as he spoke. "Why is her hand so cold?" I wanted to reassure him, to tell him it was just a dream, a trick of medication. But part of me couldn't, because I've heard things in this unit. Whispers from other patients who swore they weren't alone. Stories from nurses about figures by the bedside. We laughed them off, but not really. Not deep down. I checked the chart. He hadn't been given anything new that would cause hallucinations. His numbers were stable. He was supposed to be getting better. And yet, every night, he swore the hand returned. Then came the worst part. A few days later, his condition plummeted without warning. He coded during morning rounds. We worked on him for nearly half an hour, compressions, meds, shocks, but nothing brought him back. His body was still warm when the doctor called it, and I couldn't stop thinking about what he'd said, about the hand he felt, the one none of us admitted to holding. Later that shift, when the room had been cleared and prepped for the next patient, I went back in to finish paperwork. The air in there felt different, colder, heavier. I rubbed my arms, telling myself it was just the draft from the vents. But when I leaned against the bed rail, I swear I felt it. A brush. Soft, fleeting, but unmistakable. Like icy fingers grazing across the back of my hand. I pulled away so fast my pen clattered to the floor. My chest was tight. Breath stuck in my throat. The room was empty, but I didn't stay long enough to convince myself of that. To this day, I wonder, was it comfort or was it a warning? Did that cold hand come to ease him into death, or was it death itself, sitting quietly at his bedside, waiting for the moment to take him? And every time I start a night shift, when I touch a patient's hand to check their pulse or comfort them, I can't help but think of him. I wait for the warmth of living skin. But sometimes, I brace myself for something else, for that impossible chill. Because in the ICU, not every hand you feel belongs to the living. I can still hear those footsteps in my head. They were slow, steady, and deliberate, like someone pacing with a purpose. But the thing is, that room should have been empty. It was a night shift, of course. It always seems to be. Around 2 in the morning, when the unit goes strangely still, machines beep in rhythm, ventilators sigh, but the human noise, the chatter, the calls, the movements falls away. That's when the ICU feels less like a place of healing and more like a place that belongs to something else entirely. I was at the nurses' station, half buried in charting, when I heard them. Step, step, step. They came from the hallway just behind me, near room 14. At first, I thought it was one of the aides doing rounds, but when I turned, the hall was empty. Still, the sound carried footsteps moving back and forth, like someone pacing outside the closed door. I exchanged a glance with another nurse. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. She nodded, her face pale. The sound was unmistakable, bare feet on tile. Not shoes, not sneakers, bare flesh slapping faintly against the floor. We both walked toward the room, the sound growing clearer with each step. My stomach knotted tighter. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing, they weren't panicked. It was too calm, too steady, almost rehearsed. We reached the door. The pacing stopped. Just like that, gone. I pushed the door open, half expecting to see a patient wandering, maybe confused, maybe pulling at IV lines. But the bed was empty. Sheets tucked, monitors off. The room had been cleaned hours earlier, waiting for the next admit. And then I saw it. On the floor, faint but visible under the glow of the overhead light, were marks. Not dirt, not scuffs from shoes, marks of bare feet. The outline of toes, the arch of a heel. Damp, as though someone had stepped out of the shower and walked barefoot across the tile. I stood frozen, staring. My coworker gasped. There had been no water in that room, no patients, no reason for those marks to be there, yet they trailed across the floor, fading as they neared the bed. We backed out slowly, neither of us saying much. At the desk, we tried to laugh it off. Maybe housekeeping? Maybe a spill? But housekeeping always wore shoes. And those weren't shoe prints. Later, an older nurse, who'd been on the unit for decades, leaned over and said softly, "You heard them, didn't you? The footsteps." We nodded. Her face was grim. "I've heard them too. Always the same. Pacing outside a closed room. You open it and they stop, but the footprints stay." She didn't elaborate, and we didn't ask. But something about the way she said it told me this wasn't rare. It was just one of those things we didn't write in the chart. Over the next few weeks, I avoided that hall at night. But one evening, alone, I passed by and froze. The sound was there again, step, 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 pacing, unhurried, as if waiting. I didn't open the door this time. I just stood in the hall, heart hammering, listening until the sound stopped on its own. Some nights, I wonder if it's the echo of patients who once lay in those beds. Maybe the restless ones, the ones who never made it out. Or maybe it's something else, something that isn't ready to leave. All I know is this. When I walk that hallway in the quiet hours, I don't trust the silence. Because in the ICU, even empty rooms have a way of reminding you they're not truly empty. And every time I hear those faint, barefoot steps, I can't shake the feeling that someone or something is pacing the halls, waiting for the next door to open. I'll never forget the first night I heard the whispers. It was past midnight, the kind of hour when the ICU feels like another world entirely. The halls stretch too long, the fluorescent lights hum just a little too loud, and every sound carries farther than it should. That's when you notice things you wouldn't during the chaos of the day. I was charting at the desk, fighting sleep, when I caught at a sound so faint, I almost ignored it. At first I thought it was just the air vents rattling, but then it came again. Not mechanical, not random. It had rhythm, words, murmurs, almost like someone praying under their breath. The sound was coming from down the hall, from room 22. That room was empty, cleaned and prepped hours earlier. No monitors hooked up, no oxygen running, just a bed waiting for the next admit. I got up, curious, and started walking that way. The closer I got, the clearer the sound became. A low, steady voice, not distinct enough to make out words, but heavy with intention, murmuring, whispering, like someone reciting something they'd repeated 1,000 times. I opened the door and flicked on the light. Silence. The room was still. The vents hummed softly, but nothing more. I stepped inside, stood under the vent, and listened. Nothing. I felt foolish and went back to the desk. Half an hour later, I heard it again. This time another nurse heard it too. She looked up from her charting, her face pale. "You hear that?" she asked. We both sat frozen, listening. The whispers were back, carrying through the hall, low and measured. And it was definitely coming from the vent above, room 22. We walked down together. The door was shut, the room still empty. But the moment we stepped inside, the sound stopped, dead silent, like it had never been there at all. We exchanged uneasy glances. Neither of us spoke about it in detail, not right away. But word got around, and slowly, the story of room 22 came out. Months earlier, the room had been occupied by a patient, a Catholic priest. He'd been with us for weeks, battling pneumonia that turned septic. His decline was slow, but he never stopped praying. Day and night, even when he struggled to breathe, he'd whisper prayers. Sometimes his lips moved without sound. Sometimes his voice was hoarse but steady. You'd walk past his room at 2 a.m. and hear those murmured prayers spilling into the hallway. The night he passed, I wasn't on shift. But the ones who were said he held his rosary in one hand and whispered right up to his final breath. They said he never stopped, even when his voice cracked, and when the monitor flatlined, the prayer finally fell silent. Now, whenever the unit quiets past midnight, those same whispers come back, always from room 22, always rising through the vents like a hidden voice no one invited. Some say it's just the ducts carrying sound from another part of the hospital, but those of us who've been there long enough know better. I've heard those whispers 3 times myself. Each time, the words are just out of reach. I can't make them out clearly, but the cadence is always the same, low, steady, reverent, not pleading, not desperate, prayer. And the strangest part? It doesn't scare me the way other things in this place do. There's no cold rush, no sense of dread. If anything, it feels heavy, sad, like someone's still trying to offer comfort in a place where comfort is rare. Still, there's something about it that unsettles me, because the prayers never start when you're standing inside the room. They wait. They wait until you've shut the door, until you're just far enough down the hall for the sound to float back out at you. Like they want you to listen, but not see. Now, every time I work nights, I find myself straining my ears when I pass that room. Some nights it's silent, some nights it's not. And when the whispers start low and steady, threading through the vents above the empty bed, I can't help but think of him lying there with his rosary, whispering into the darkness, refusing to stop until something greater finally answered. And in those moments, I wonder if he ever left this ICU at all. I'll never forget the night of the empty bed. In all my years in the ICU, I've seen things that keep me awake long after my shift ends. Things that don't fit neatly into medicine or logic or the kind of explanations we comfort ourselves with. But that night still sits heavy in my chest. It was the dead stretch of the night shift, just past 3 in the morning. The unit was quiet in that eerie way it gets machines humming in rhythm, vents sighing overhead, footsteps echoing down long, dim hallways. Most of the patients were sedated or resting. It should have been calm. Then the alarm started. It came from room 17. Sharp, blaring tones, the unmistakable sound of a patient crashing. The kind of alarms that make every nurse's stomach drop. In seconds, half the staff were sprinting down the hall. I was among them, heart pounding, running through the checklist in my head compressions. Airway, meds, code cart. We burst through the door and stopped cold. The bed was empty, sheets pulled tight, perfectly made. No IV pumps running, no lines attached, just an empty, silent bed. Yet the monitors were alive, flashing wild vitals, heart rate spiking, oxygen plummeting, alarms screaming. Numbers that shouldn't exist. The room had been cleared hours earlier. The patient assigned there, a man in his 60s, had died during the evening shift. His body had been taken to the morgue nearly 3 hours before. We all knew it. We'd all signed off on the paperwork. There should have been nothing left in that room but silence. And yet, the monitors told another story. For a moment, none of us moved. We just stood frozen, the alarms echoing off the walls. Finally, one of the nurses stepped forward, her hand trembling as she hit the silence button. The numbers on the screen flickered, then flatlined. A long, steady tone filled the room. The same tone we'd heard earlier that night when he passed. We pulled the leads off the bed, checked the connections, even rebooted the monitor. Everything looked normal. No reason for the equipment to have lit up, no reason for those vital signs to have appeared. But all of us had seen it. All of us had heard it. Later, at the desk, we tried to make sense of it. Maybe it was a glitch, someone suggested. Maybe static, a short in the wiring. But none of us believed it. The vitals weren't random numbers. They followed a pattern, first a racing heart, then a drop in oxygen, then the inevitable flatline. The same sequence his body went through hours earlier. And here's the part that chills me the most. The nurse who'd cared for him before he died was pale as she spoke. She said he'd been terrified in his final hours. Not of pain, not of dying, but of being alone. He'd gripped her hand and whispered, "Don't leave me when it happens. Please, don't leave me." She'd promised she wouldn't, but when the time came, she had to step out to get the doctor. He passed in those minutes, alone in that bed. So when those alarms went off, it felt less like a glitch and more like he was running the code again, as if he was still there, still crashing, still waiting for someone to save him. I went back into that room once more before the shift ended. The monitors were dark, silent, but the air felt heavy, like the aftermath of a storm. I laid my hand on the bed rail, and it was ice cold. Colder than any empty bed had a right to be. Now, whenever I hear alarms in the ICU, I feel that old chill crawl up my spine. Because sometimes, the machines aren't just telling us about the living. Sometimes, they're echoing what's already gone. And every time I walk past room 17, I can't help but look at that bed, waiting for the monitors to flare to life again. Waiting for the code that should have ended hours ago to play itself out once more in the silence of an empty room. Because in the ICU, not every alarm means someone can still be saved. Sometimes, it means they're not ready to let go. Hi, I just want to take a moment to thank every single one of you for being here. Your support means more than words can ever express. Every view, every like, every comment, it all helps keep this channel alive and growing. If you've enjoyed these stories, please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. It really makes a huge difference. I'd also love to hear from you. Share your own experiences in the comment section, and let me know where you're watching from. Hearing your stories and seeing the places you all come from is one of the best parts of this community. Thank you again for being part of this journey with me.